Beatrice Caldwell's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she watched the man who'd promised to marry her turn his back and walk away. Right there on the Dodge City platform, with 100 strangers watching, he looked at her once and decided she wasn't worth keeping.
Are you traveling alone?
The August heat pressed down like judgment itself, but the coldness in her chest was worse.
Yes.
She'd traveled 2,000 miles for this moment, and now she sat alone on her trunk, wondering if her mother had been right all along, that women like her didn't deserve happy endings. But sometimes the ending you planned isn't the one you need. Before we dive into this incredible true story of courage and unexpected love, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. This story gets wild, and you won't want to miss what happens next. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these frontier tales travel. Now settle in, friend. This is going to be a ride. The train's whistle still echoed across the Kansas plains when Beatrice realized something was wrong. She stood on the platform of Dodge City Station, her purple traveling dress already wilted from the August heat, scanning the crowd for a face she'd only seen in a single photograph. Silas Bridger, her soon-to-be husband. The man whose letters had been so beautiful she'd read them by candlelight until she'd memorized every word. A partnership of equals, he'd written. I need a strong woman with a stronger heart. She'd believed him. The platform churned with movement. Cattle drovers with dust-caked boots. Gamblers in fancy waistcoats. Families reuniting with tears and embraces. But no one approached her. No one smiled in recognition. Beatrice's grip tightened on her carpet bag. She was a large woman, she knew that. Knew it in every mirror, every sidelong glance, every whispered comment her mother thought she couldn't hear. But Silas had said he wanted Hardy, had said he needed someone substantial to help build a life on the frontier. She'd let herself hope. Ma'am, you looking for someone? The station master, an older gentleman with kind eyes and a tobacco-stained mustache, touched his hat brim. She fumbled with the envelope in her reticule, pulled out the paper with Silas Bridger's name and ranch location written in careful script. I'm supposed to meet Mr. Bridger. We're to be married. Today, actually. The station master's face did something complicated. Pity mixed with embarrassment. He glanced toward the edge of the platform, then back at her. Ma'am, there was a gentleman here, about 20 minutes ago. Asked me which train was coming in from the east. Beatrice's heart began to pound. Where is he? Well, that's the thing. The man shifted uncomfortably. He waited right there by that post, watched the passengers getting off. And then he just turned around and left, got on his horse and rode off toward town. The words didn't make sense at first. Beatrice's mind stumbled over them, trying to rearrange them into something that fit reality. Are you certain? Yes, ma'am. I'm real sorry. The platform seemed to tilt. Beatrice heard a buzzing in her ears that had nothing to do with the flies circling the horse droppings nearby. She'd spent 2 years saving money. 2 years corresponding with a man who'd promised her a new life. 2 years defying her mother's predictions that no man would ever want her. And he'd looked at her getting off that train and decided she wasn't worth meeting. I see. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Thank you for your honesty. She turned away before he could see her face crumble. Found her trunk where the porter had left it. Sat down on its curved top and stared at absolutely nothing. Around her, life continued. A child shrieked with laughter. Somewhere a dog barked. The smell of coal smoke and summer dust filled her nose. But Beatrice felt like she was watching it all from underwater, distant and drowning at the same time. Too big. Of course. Always too big. Too much. Too improper for polite society back home. Too fat for a rancher who needed a wife. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. Beatrice, no man wants a woman who can't control her appetite. She'd been 11 years old the first time she'd heard that. 29 now. 18 years of that poison. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. But her hands shook as she pulled out her handkerchief and dabbed at her temples. Not tears, just sweat, just the oppressive Kansas heat. "Ma'am." Beatrice looked up. The man standing before her was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. Dark hair curled at his collar beneath a battered hat. His face was weathered all hard angles and sun-darkened skin, but his eyes were a startling clear gray. Sad eyes, the kind that had seen too much. "I don't mean to intrude," he said, his voice low and careful. "But I couldn't help overhearing. Are you all right?" Pride made her spine straighten. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you." "With respect, ma'am, you don't look fine." Something about his bluntness surprised a laugh out of her, short and bitter. "Well, you're observant." He glanced at her trunk at the station master, who was trying very hard to look busy at the way she gripped that handkerchief like a lifeline. "You got somewhere to stay?" "Not yet." "You know anyone in Dodge City?" "No." He removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "This might sound forward, but there's a decent boarding house about 3 blocks from here. Woman named Pearl Farnsworth runs it. She's good people. Honest prices, clean rooms." Beatrice studied him more carefully. Rough clothes, but clean. Calloused hands, a working man. Something in his posture suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, but was forcing himself to stand here anyway. "Why are you helping me?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. "Because somebody should." It was such a simple answer. No platitudes about God's will or silver linings. Just somebody should. Beatrice felt something crack in her chest. "I don't need charity." "Good. I'm not offering any." He met her eyes directly. "I'm offering information about a boarding house. What you do with it is your business." She shouldn't trust him. Shouldn't trust any man after what had just happened. But there was something in his face, a bone-deep weariness she recognized. The look of someone who understood what it meant to be alone. "What's your name?" she asked. "Nathaniel Morrison. Most folks call me Nate." "Beatrice Caldwell." She stood, smoothed her skirts, tried to gather the tatters of her dignity. "And I would appreciate directions to this boarding house, Mr. Morrison." Something flickered in his expression, approval maybe, or relief. "It'd be easier if I walked you there, if that's all right." Every lesson her mother had ever taught her about propriety screamed that it wasn't all right, that accepting help from a strange man in a strange town was foolish and improper and dangerous. But propriety had gotten her a train ticket to nowhere and a fiancé who'd abandoned her without a word. That would be acceptable. Nate arranged for her trunk to be held at the station. Then he offered his arm, formal and old-fashioned, in a way that surprised her, and led her off the platform. They walked in silence down the main street. Dodge City sprawled before them in all its chaotic glory. False-fronted buildings lined both sides of the dusty thoroughfare. Saloons with their tinny piano music. General stores with goods spilling onto the wooden sidewalks. Men on horseback. Women with parasols. The whole messy, vital pulse of frontier life. Beatrice had dreamed about this. About walking down a western street as someone's wife. Someone's partner. Someone's choice. Instead, she was walking beside a stranger who pitied her. "I know what you're thinking," she said abruptly. Nate glanced at her. "Doubt that. You're thinking I'm a fool, that I should have known better than to travel all this way for a man I'd never met. Actually, I was thinking you're brave." That stopped her mid-step. "Brave? Takes courage to leave everything you know, to risk everything on the chance of something better." He looked at her steadily. "That's not foolish, that's brave." Beatrice's throat tightened. She'd been called many things in her life. Difficult, stubborn, unmarriageable, heavy, inappropriate, but never brave. "Thank you," she managed. They continued walking. As they passed the Long Branch Saloon, 2 men standing outside noticed them. One of them, a red-faced cowhand with a whiskey flush, let out a low whistle. Well, now that's a lot of woman. His companion laughed. Bridger must have run scared when he saw that getting off the train. Beatrice's face burned. She tried to walk faster, but Nate's hand on her arm stopped her. Wait here a moment. Before she could protest, he'd crossed the street toward the men. She couldn't hear what he said. His voice was too low, but she saw the change in his posture. Saw the way he stood taking up space, radiating quiet menace. The red-faced cowhand raised his hands in mock surrender. No offense meant friend. Then keep your mouth shut. Nate turned and walked back to Beatrice as if nothing had happened. But she noticed his jaw was clenched, a muscle jumping beneath his beard. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. They walked another block in silence. Then Beatrice said quietly, Does everyone in this town know what happened to me? News travels fast in small places. Wonderful. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I came here to escape being the subject of gossip, my family's disappointment. Instead, I've become the fat bride who got abandoned at the train station. I'm sure that'll make a delightful story for everyone's supper table. Nate stopped walking, turned to face her fully. Listen to me. You're not a story. You're not a joke. You're a woman who took a risk and some coward didn't have the decency to honor his word. That says everything about him, and nothing about you. Beatrice stared at him. This stranger with sad eyes and calloused hands defending her honor like it mattered, like she mattered. You don't even know me. I know enough. Before she could respond, they arrived at a 2-story wooden building with a neatly painted sign, Farnsworth's boarding house. Window boxes held struggling geraniums. The porch was swept clean. It looked respectable, safe. The door opened before they could knock. The woman who emerged was round and solid, probably in her late 50s, with gray-streaked hair pinned in a no-nonsense bun. She wore a practical calico dress and an apron dusted with flour. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over both of them. Nate Morrison, haven't seen you in 6 months. Mrs. Farnsworth. He touched his hat. I've got someone here who needs a room. Pearl Farnsworth's gaze moved to Beatrice, and something in her face softened. Come inside, dear. You look about ready to collapse from this heat. The interior was blessedly cool and smelled of bread baking. Pearl gestured them into a sitting room with worn but clean furniture. Without being asked, she disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a glass of water. Drink that. Then tell me what you need. Beatrice drank. The water was cold, drawn from a well, probably, and it cleared some of the fog from her head. I need a room. I can pay. She set down the glass with deliberate care. I'm a seamstress. I'm skilled. I can find work. I just need somewhere to stay while I get established. Pearl looked at Nate. What's the story here? She was supposed to meet someone. Plans changed. Pearl's eyes narrowed. Let me guess. Silas Bridger. The name hung in the air like a curse. You know him? Beatrice asked. Know of him. He came in here 2 months ago asking if I knew any respectable women who might be interested in marriage. I told him I didn't engage in matchmaking. Pearl snorted. Man had a look about him I didn't trust. Slippery. Wish someone had told me that before I spent my savings getting here. Well, you're here now, and you need a place to stay. Pearl stood all business. I've got a room on the 2nd floor. Faces east, so you'll get morning light. $1 a day, includes breakfast and supper. You want it? $1 a day. Beatrice did the mental arithmetic. Her remaining funds would last 2 weeks, maybe 3 if she stretched it. I'll take it. Good. Pearl extended her hand and they shook like business partners. I'll show you up. As Beatrice followed Pearl toward the stairs, she glanced back at Nate. He was already moving toward the door, clearly uncomfortable with gratitude or sentiment. Mr. Morrison. He paused. Thank you. Truly. He nodded once, awkward and brief, and then he was gone. Pearl watched him leave, a knowing look on her face. That man's got a story, she said quietly. Don't we all? Beatrice replied. The room was small, but scrupulously clean. A narrow bed with a faded quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin, a single window overlooking the street. Not much, but it was hers, at least for now. After Pearl left, Beatrice sank onto the bed and finally let herself feel the full weight of the day. She'd been so sure, so certain that coming west was her chance to reinvent herself, to escape her mother's disappointed sighs and her sister's perfect marriages and the suffocating propriety of Boston society. Instead, she'd discovered that shame and rejection traveled just fine, thank you. They didn't care about geography. A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. It's open. Pearl entered carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and cold chicken. You missed lunch on that train, I'd wager. Beatrice's stomach clenched with hunger she'd been ignoring. I couldn't possibly eat. Pearl set the tray on the small table. We'll call it part of today's rate. She turned to leave, then paused. That Silas Bridger's a fool. You don't have to. I'm not being kind. I'm being honest. Pearl looked at her directly. Any man who'd walk away from a woman brave enough to cross half the country for him isn't worth a second thought. You're better off. Am I? Beatrice heard the bitterness in her own voice. Because right now I'm alone in a strange town with limited funds and no prospects. Right now, you've got a clean room, a good meal, and time to figure out your next move. Pearl's voice was firm. That's more than a lot of women have. Don't waste it feeling sorry for yourself. The words were harsh, but not unkind. Beatrice recognized them for what they were, a lifeline disguised as tough love. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just eat. After Pearl left, Beatrice did eat. Every bite. And as her body settled, her mind began to work. She wasn't going home. That much was certain. Her mother would see this as proof of every cruel thing she'd ever said. Her father would be disappointed, but unsurprised. Her sisters would offer sympathy while secretly feeling superior. No, she'd come to Kansas to build a new life. One man's cruelty wouldn't stop her. She was a skilled seamstress. Every town needed alterations, repairs, custom work. She could build a clientele, make a name for herself, prove she didn't need Silas Bridger or any man. The thought steadied her. That evening, Pearl invited her to share supper with the other boarders, an elderly gentleman who worked at the bank and a young couple just passing through. The conversation was polite and carefully avoided any mention of why Beatrice had arrived. She appreciated the discretion. After supper, she stood on the front porch, watching the street as twilight settled. Dodge City transformed in the fading light. Lamps flickered to life in windows. The saloons grew louder. Somewhere a dog howled at the rising moon. Couldn't sleep. Beatrice turned. Nate stood at the bottom of the porch steps, hat in hand. Just thinking. Mind some company. She gestured to the empty space beside her, and he climbed the steps. They stood in companionable silence, watching the street. Mrs. Farnsworth treating you well? Very well. She's formidable. That pulled a small smile from him. That's one word for her. More silence. Then Beatrice said, Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you help me today? The truth. Nate was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. 5 years ago, my wife died giving birth to our daughter. The baby. She only lived 6 months. Fever took her. Beatrice's breath caught. I'm so sorry. When Margaret, my wife, when she was dying, she was scared. Alone, even though I was right there holding her hand, and I couldn't do anything to make it better. He stared at his hands. When I saw you sitting on that trunk looking lost, I guess I thought maybe this time I could do something. I'm not your wife. I know that. He looked at her then, and she saw the depth of grief in his eyes. But maybe helping you helps me remember I'm still human, that I can still do the right thing even if it's small. Beatrice understood in that moment that Nathaniel Morrison was just as lost as she was, just better at hiding it. Thank you, she said quietly, for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Hard to miss you, you take up space. He said it plainly without malice. That's not an insult. Most people go through life trying to be invisible. You stand there solid and real. That takes something. No one had ever said anything like that to her before, not in her entire life. Before she could respond, he was already moving toward the steps. I should go. Just wanted to make sure you were settled. Mr. Morrison, Nate. He paused. Will I see you again? He seemed to consider the question carefully. I'm working at the smithy on 3rd Street. If you need anything, you can find me there. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Beatrice stood alone on the porch, feeling the weight of the day finally settling into her bones. She was exhausted, humiliated, heartbroken. But she was also still standing. And tomorrow, she'd figure out what came next. The next morning arrived with punishing heat. Beatrice woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee drifting upstairs. For a moment, just a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back. She dressed carefully in her second-best dress, navy blue practical, and pinned her red hair into a severe bun. Looking in the small mirror, she saw what Silas Bridger must have seen. A large woman, unfashionably curved, freckled from the sun, not delicate, not dainty, not any of the things women were supposed to be. Good, she told her reflection. Delicate things break. Downstairs, Pearl had breakfast waiting. Coffee strong enough to strip paint eggs, fried hard, thick slices of bread with butter. Eat up. You've got a big day ahead of you. I do. You said you're a seamstress. Mrs. Henderson runs the dress shop on Main Street. She's been complaining for months about needing help. If you can prove you know your way around a needle, she'll hire you. Beatrice's chest tightened with something that felt dangerously like hope. Why are you helping me? Pearl poured herself more coffee and sat down heavily. 30 years ago, I came west with my husband. We were going to build something grand. Big ranch, lots of cattle. But he died in the first winter. Pneumonia. I was 26 years old alone with no money and no prospects. She met Beatrice's eyes. A woman named Sarah Kane took me in, gave me work, taught me how to survive. When she passed, she left me this house. So now I do the same when I can. Pay it forward, as they say. I'll pay you back. I know you will. Now finish your eggs and get yourself over to Henderson's before someone else takes that job. Beatrice found the dress shop easily enough. It was a narrow storefront, wedged between the general store and a barber shop, with a faded sign that read, Henderson's Fine Dresses and Alterations. She pushed open the door, making the bell jingle. The interior was cramped and cluttered. Bolts of fabric leaned against walls. A dress form stood draped in half-finished muslin. At a table in the back, a thin woman with gray hair and wire spectacles was bent over intricate needlework. She looked up, squinting. Help you. Mrs. Henderson. My name is Beatrice Caldwell. Mrs. Farnsworth sent me. She said you might need a seamstress. Mrs. Henderson set down her work, removed her spectacles, and studied Beatrice with sharp eyes. You any good? I'm excellent. The bluntness made Mrs. Henderson smile. Confident. I like that. What can you do? Alterations, custom work, embroidery, pattern making. I apprenticed with a dressmaker in Boston for 5 years before starting my own business. Your own business. Why'd you leave? Beatrice met her eyes steadily. Personal reasons. Mrs. Henderson seemed to appreciate the honesty. She gestured to a pile of mending on a nearby chair. Let me see your work. Fix that torn seam on the blue dress. I'll watch. Beatrice removed her gloves, selected thread and needle from Mrs. Henderson's supplies, and set to work. Her hands moved with practiced confidence. The stitches were small, even nearly invisible. Within minutes, the tear had vanished. She held up the dress. Mrs. Henderson inspected it closely, then nodded. "You'll do. 50 cents a day, 6 days a week. You work from 8 to 6 with an hour for lunch. I provide materials, you provide skill. And no gossip with the customers. Half the women who come in here just want to talk scandal. I won't have it." "That's acceptable." "Good. You start tomorrow." Mrs. Henderson returned to her needlework conversation, apparently over. Beatrice left the shop feeling lighter than she had in days. Employment. Income. A path forward. She was so focused on her thoughts that she almost walked past the commotion. A small crowd had gathered near the general store. Raised voices, the sound of glass breaking. Beatrice's instinct said to keep walking, but curiosity pulled her closer. In the center of the crowd, 2 men were arguing. One was young, couldn't be more than 20, with a scared expression and empty hands raised in surrender. The other was older, broader, with a cruel twist to his mouth and a gun on his hip. "You think you can short me, boy?" "Mr. Bridger, I swear I paid you what we agreed." Beatrice's blood turned to ice. Silas Bridger. He looked different than his photograph. Older, harder. The kind of handsome that hid meanness underneath. He had the young man by the collar, now shaking him like a dog. "You calling me a liar?" "No, sir, I just—" Silas backhanded him across the face. The crowd murmured but didn't interfere. This was the West. Men settled their own disputes. But Beatrice felt rage rising in her chest, hot and righteous. This was the man who'd abandoned her, who'd promised partnership and delivered humiliation. And now he was bullying someone weaker. Before she could think it through, she was pushing through the crowd. "Let him go." Silas turned, still gripping the young man's collar. His eyes traveled over Beatrice with dismissive recognition. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does. You owe me an explanation." The crowd went silent. Everyone understood what was happening now. This was the woman, the abandoned bride. Silas released the young man, who scrambled away. Then he turned his full attention on Beatrice, and she saw cruelty settle into his features like a familiar mask. "You want an explanation? Fine. You're not what I ordered." The casual brutality of it stole her breath. "I'm not a mail-order item." "Could have fooled me. You responded to an advertisement, same as buying from a catalog." He stepped closer, and she smelled whiskey on his breath. "I wanted a strong woman, not a fat one. There's a difference." The crowd was riveting now, eating this up. Beatrice felt shame try to crawl up her spine, but she shoved it down with rage. "I'm glad you showed your true character before I wasted my life on you. You're not a man. You're a coward who breaks promises and hurts people weaker than himself." Silas's face darkened. "You watch your mouth. Or what? You'll abandon me again." She laughed bitterly. "Too late for that." His hand moved toward his gun, not drawing, just resting there. Threatening. "You should leave Dodge City. Nothing for you here." "I'll stay exactly as long as I please." "That right?" He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. "Let me make something clear. This is my town. You're an embarrassment here, a joke. Every person who sees you is going to remember that you got off a train, and I took one look and walked away. You think you can build a life here with that hanging over you?" Each word was a knife aimed precisely at every insecurity she'd ever carried. But before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Bridger." Nate pushed through the crowd. He didn't look at Beatrice. His entire focus was on Silas. "This isn't your business, Morrison." "I'm making it my business." Silas sized him up. They were roughly the same height, but Nate was broader, and there was something in his stillness that suggested violence held carefully in check. You defending her honor? That's sweet. You looking to take my leavings? Nate's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed level. Walk away. Or what? Or we'll both find out what happens when you push too far. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Silas smiled cold and knowing. This isn't over. He walked away. The crowd dispersed, disappointed that violence hadn't erupted. Within moments, the street returned to normal. Except Beatrice, who stood shaking with adrenaline and humiliation and rage all tangled together. Nate turned to her. You all right? I had it handled. I know you did, but sometimes it helps to not handle things alone. She wanted to argue, to assert her independence. But the truth was, she was grateful he'd come. Grateful she hadn't been completely alone. Thank you. Don't mention it. He glanced down the street where Silas had disappeared. But he's right about one thing. He does have influence in this town. You might want to be careful. I didn't come all this way to hide. Something flickered in Nate's expression. Approval, maybe. Or recognition. No, I don't suppose you did. They stood there on the dusty street, two damaged people who'd found each other by accident, neither knowing what came next. But for the first time since arriving in Dodge City, Beatrice felt something other than shame. She felt angry. And anger, she'd learned, was so much better than despair. That confrontation with Silas changed something in Beatrice. The anger didn't fade, it crystallized into determination. She'd be damned if she'd slink back to Boston with her tail between her legs. If Silas Bridger wanted her gone, she'd plant roots so deep in this town, he'd choke on them. She started work at Henderson's the next morning. Mrs. Henderson proved to be exacting but fair, and the work itself was a blessing. When Beatrice's hands were busy with needle and thread, her mind couldn't spiral into shame and doubt. She fixed 'ems, and took in waists, and listened to the steady rhythm of Mrs. Henderson's breathing as they worked in companionable silence. The customers were another matter. The first woman, who came in, a rancher's wife named Mrs. Thompson, took one look at Beatrice, and her eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Oh, you're the one. Beatrice kept her voice pleasant. I'm the seamstress. How can I help you? Mrs. Thompson's dress needed letting out at the waist. She stood on the fitting platform while Beatrice pinned, and the whole time Beatrice could feel the woman's eyes on her, assessing, judging. So, you really did come all this way to marry Silas Bridger? I did. Must have been quite a shock when things didn't work out. Beatrice placed another pin with deliberate care. Life is full of surprises. I suppose, though I always say you can't blame a man for having standards. The pin in Beatrice's hand drove a little too deep into the fabric. She pulled it out, started over. If you'll excuse me saying so, Beatrice said, her voice steady. Mr. Bridger's standards seem primarily concerned with appearances rather than character. A man of true substance would honor his commitments. Mrs. Henderson glanced up from her work, a smile tugging at her mouth. Mrs. Thompson's face flushed. Well, I suppose we all have opinions. Yes, ma'am, we do. After Mrs. Thompson left, Mrs. Henderson let out a dry chuckle. That woman's been insufferable for 20 years. Nice to see someone give it back to her. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. Just don't make a habit of it. We need customers, even the terrible ones. But word spread quickly. By the end of the week, half the women who came in for fittings seemed more interested in gossip than garments. They'd ask leading questions about Silas, about her journey west, about whether she planned to stay. Beatrice learned to deflect with polite vagueness while her fingers flew through stitches. The other half were kinder. A few seemed genuinely sympathetic. One woman, a tired-looking mother with 3 children clinging to her skirts, waited until her fitting was done, then pressed an extra quarter into Beatrice's hand. For your trouble. Starting over's hard. I know. Those small kindnesses kept Beatrice going when shame threatened to drown her. Nate appeared at the shop on her 3rd day of work. Mrs. Henderson was out delivering an order, and Beatrice was alone working on a complicated alteration that required her full attention. The bell above the door jingled. She looked up, needle still poised. "Mr. Morrison?" "Nate." He stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable, hat in hand. "Sorry to bother you at work." "You're not bothering me. Did you need something mended?" "No, He cleared his throat. "I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right, after what happened with Bridger the other day." Beatrice set down her work. "I'm fine. Working, earning. That's what matters." "Good. That's good." He shifted his weight. "Pearl mentioned you're eating most of your meals at the boarding house. I thought maybe if you wanted, there's a decent place that serves supper on Sundays. Nothing fancy, but the food's good and it's quiet." It took her a moment to understand what he was offering. "Are you asking me to have supper with you?" His ears turned red. "If you want. If not, that's fine too. I just thought you might like getting out of Pearl's once in a while. And He stopped, started over. "I don't talk to many people, but I don't mind talking to you." It was possibly the most awkward invitation Beatrice had ever received. It was also the most genuine. "I'd like that." Relief crossed his face. "Sunday then. Around 6. Sunday at 6. He nodded, put his hat back on, and left before she could say anything else. Mrs. Henderson returned 10 minutes later, took one look at Beatrice's face, and smiled knowingly. "That man's got it bad. He's just being kind. Honey, men aren't just kind. Not like that." Sunday came wrapped in heat that made the air shimmer. Beatrice changed dresses 3 times before settling on her green cotton, the one that made her hair look more auburn than red. She told herself it didn't matter what she wore. This wasn't a courtship, just 2 lonely people sharing a meal. But her hands shook as she pinned her hair. Nate arrived at Pearl's exactly at 6, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. Pearl watched them leave with undisguised satisfaction. "Don't stay out too late." "We're having supper, not robbing a bank," Beatrice said. That's what they all say." The restaurant Nate chose was on the quiet end of town, away from the saloons and their raucous noise. The proprietor, an older Mexican woman named Mrs. Alvarez, greeted Nate with warmth and showed them to a corner table. "Your usual," she asked him. "Please, and whatever the lady wants." They ordered, then sat in silence that stretched awkward and uncertain between them. Finally Beatrice said, "I don't actually know anything about you, except that you're a blacksmith and your wife died." Nate winced. "Not much else to know." "I doubt that." He traced the rim of his water glass with one calloused finger. "I grew up in Ohio. My father had a small farm. I learned smithing from a neighbor who needed an apprentice. Met Margaret at a church social when I was 22. We married, came west looking for opportunities. Had Sarah 3 years later." His voice caught on his daughter's name. "After they died, I couldn't stay in one place, so I didn't." "Where have you been?" "Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, wherever I could find work." He met her eyes. "Dodge City's just another stop. Or it was supposed to be." "What changed?" He was quiet for a long moment. "You did." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was ready to examine. The food arrived: beef stew with thick chunks of potato, fresh bread, coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of boiled dirt. They ate, and the silence grew more comfortable. "Can I ask you something?" Nate said eventually. "Of course." "Why'd you really come west, and don't tell me just for Bridger? There's more to it." Beatrice set down her spoon, considered lying, decided against it. "My mother spent my entire life trying to make me smaller portions, smaller ambitions, smaller presents. She wanted me to disappear into wallpaper and marry some boring man who'd tolerate me out of Christian charity." She laughed bitterly. "My sisters did exactly that. Eleanor married a banker who barely speaks to her. Victoria married a lawyer who keeps a mistress. They're both miserable but respectable, which is apparently what matters. And you didn't want that. I wanted to matter, to be chosen, not tolerated. When Silas's advertisement talked about partnership and strength, I thought—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought maybe out here away from everything I knew, I could be the person I wanted to be, instead of the disappointment everyone expected." Nate reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture was tentative, asking permission. "You matter," he said quietly. "You're not a disappointment." Beatrice's throat tightened. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "I know you crossed half a country for a chance at something better. I know you stood up to Bridger in front of the whole town. I know you're working 6 days a week to build a life from nothing." His hand tightened on hers. "That's not disappointment. That's courage." She looked down at their joined hands. His was so much larger, roughened by work and scarred by hot metal. Hers was marked by years of needle pricks and calluses from thread tension. 2 working hands, both damaged, both strong. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. "Because someone should be. And because—" He paused, seemed to struggle with the words. "Because when I look at you, I remember what it feels like to want things. I've been numb for so long, dead inside. But you make me feel alive again, and that terrifies me." The honesty of it hit her like a physical force. "Nate, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know I've got nothing to offer. I'm a drifter with more grief than sense, but I wanted you to know. You changed something in me, just by being you." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of wanting this, wanting you, and having it turn into another humiliation." He pulled his hand back, and for a moment she thought she'd ruined everything. But then he said, "I can't promise not to hurt you. People die, people leave, life happens. But I can promise I'll never walk away because you're not what I pictured. You're better than anything I could have imagined." The words broke something open in her chest. "Take me home," she said. His face fell. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No, I mean—" She stood, heart pounding. "Take me home so I can think about this without everyone watching." Understanding dawned. He left money on the table and offered his arm. They walked back to Pearl's in charged silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Dodge City was settling into its evening rhythm, saloons growing louder, families heading inside, the day's heat finally breaking. At Pearl's front porch, Beatrice stopped, turned to face him. "I need time," she said, "to figure out what I want, what I can risk." "I understand." "But I—" She took a breath, gathered courage. "I feel it too. Whatever this is, I feel it." Nate's hand came up gentle and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The tenderness of the gesture made her chest ache. "Then that's enough. For now." He left. Beatrice stood on the porch, watching him disappear into the twilight, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. Inside, Pearl was waiting with a knowing smile and a cup of tea. "Don't say it," Beatrice warned. "Wouldn't dream of it." But Pearl's smile said everything. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange, suspended tension. Beatrice threw herself into work. Mrs. Henderson, impressed by her skill, started giving her more complex projects. Custom dresses, intricate alterations, embroidery work that required patience and precision. The money helped. Beatrice opened an account at the bank, watching her savings grow coin by coin. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Every dollar was proof she could survive, could build something. Nate appeared at irregular intervals. Sometimes he'd stop by the shop with some excuse, a torn shirt that needed mending, a question about where to buy good thread for leatherwork. Mrs. Henderson would roll her eyes and point him toward the general store, but she never chased him off. Other times, Beatrice would see him on the street and they'd fall into step together, walking and talking about small things. He told her about his work at the smithy, the satisfaction of shaping metal, the rhythm of hammer on anvil. She told him about difficult customers and the particular challenges of setting sleeves properly. It was domestic, comfortable, terrifying in its normalcy. Then one afternoon, a woman came into the shop who changed everything. She was younger than Beatrice, maybe 25, with a thin face and tired eyes. 4 children trailed behind her, ranging from about 8 down to a toddler who clung to her skirts. Her dress was clean, but worn mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible. "Can I help you?" Beatrice asked. The woman glanced at Mrs. Henderson, who was absorbed in her work, then back at Beatrice. "I heard you were good with alterations, and—" she lowered her voice, "and that you were kind to women who needed kindness." Beatrice's throat tightened. "What do you need?" The woman produced a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a dress, or what had been a dress. It was torn at the bodice, the fabric stained and damaged. "My husband," the woman's voice cracked. "He gets angry when he drinks, which is most nights. This was my good dress, the only one I had for church. I can't afford a new one, but I thought maybe you could fix it." Beatrice took the dress, examining the damage. The fabric was ruined beyond simple repair, but the woman's eyes held such desperate hope. "I can't fix this," Beatrice said gently. The woman's face crumbled. "But I can make you a new one. Same pattern, better fabric." "I can't pay—" "I'm not asking you to." The woman stared. "Why would you do that?" "Because I know what it's like to be broken," Beatrice thought. "Because someone showed me kindness when I needed it most. Because I can—" she said aloud. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. God bless you." After she left, Mrs. Henderson looked up from her work. "That's coming out of your wages, you know." "I know." Mrs. Henderson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You're a good woman, Beatrice Caldwell. Better than most who've walked through that door." That evening, Beatrice told Nate about it over coffee at the small restaurant that had become their place. "You gave away a dress you can't afford to give. She needed it more than I need the money. That's—" He shook his head, something like wonder in his expression. "That's exactly the kind of thing Margaret would have done." The name hung between them. His dead wife. The ghost in every conversation. "Tell me about her," Beatrice said. Nate looked surprised. "Why?" "Because she was part of you. Because I want to know the woman who shaped the man you are." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking slow at first, then with gathering momentum. Margaret had been small and fierce, he said, quick to laugh and quicker to defend anyone she thought was being treated unfairly. She'd wanted children desperately, had cried with joy when she realized she was pregnant. The pregnancy had been difficult. She'd been sick, constantly weak and fragile. "I should have taken her back east," Nate said, voice rough. "To a real doctor, but she insisted she was fine, and I believed her because I wanted to believe her. It wasn't your fault." "I was there," he said flatly. "I held her hand while she bled out. I promised her everything would be fine, and I was wrong." Beatrice reached across the table, took his hand. "You did everything you could. It wasn't enough. It never is. But that doesn't mean you failed." His fingers tightened on hers. "Sometimes I forget what she looked like. Her face. I have to concentrate to remember. And then I feel guilty, like I'm betraying her." "You're not betraying anyone by living." "How do you know?" "Because I have to believe that. Otherwise, what's the point? We all carry ghosts. But we can't let them turn us into ghosts too." Nate looked at her with something like awe. "How are you so sure?" "I'm not. I'm terrified constantly. But being scared and doing it anyway, that's the only kind of bravery I know." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, gentle and formal and devastating. "Will you marry me?" The question landed like a thunderclap. Beatrice's heart stopped. Started again too fast. "What? I know it's sudden. I know I've got nothing to offer but hard work and grief. But—" he took a breath. But you make me want to try again. To build something. To be someone worth knowing. And I hope maybe I do the same for you." 1,000 thoughts crashed through her mind at once. This was insane. They barely knew each other. She'd already been humiliated by one failed engagement. What if this was another mistake? But then she looked at his face, open and vulnerable and terrified, and she knew. This wasn't Silas making promises he didn't mean. This was Nate offering her exactly what he had: honesty, effort, presence. "I have conditions," she heard herself say. Hope flickered in his eyes. "Name them." "I keep working. I keep my own money. I make my own decisions." "Agreed. And if this doesn't work, if we try and fail, you don't get to make me feel small because of it." "I would never. Promise me." "I promise." His hand tightened on hers. "Anything else?" "Yes." She took a breath, steadying herself. "Promise me we'll talk. About the hard things. About Margaret and Sarah, and your grief. About my fears and my anger. No silence. No shutting each other out." "I promise." Beatrice looked at their joined hands. Thought about the woman she'd been 3 weeks ago, stepping off that train full of hope and plans. That woman was gone, burned away by humiliation and rage. But maybe this woman, harder, wiser, scarred, but standing, maybe this woman deserved happiness after all. "Then yes," she said. "I'll marry you." Nate's smile broke across his face like sunrise. He stood, pulled her up, and kissed her right there in the restaurant. It was clumsy and sweet and tasted like coffee and hope. When they broke apart, Mrs. Alvarez was watching from the kitchen door, beaming. "About time," she called out. "I've been watching you two dance around each other for weeks." They laughed, giddy and uncertain and terrified. "When?" Nate asked. Beatrice thought about propriety, about what people would say, about how this would look, marrying another man so soon after being abandoned. Then she thought, to hell with what people think. "Soon," she said, "before we lose our nerve." They decided on the following Saturday, 5 days away. Enough time to make arrangements, but not enough to second-guess themselves into paralysis. Pearl was delighted. "I knew it. The moment you two met, I knew." Mrs. Henderson was more practical. "You'll need a dress." "I can't afford." "Don't be foolish. We'll make one. Consider it my wedding gift." They worked late every night that week, Beatrice and Mrs. Henderson side by side, creating something simple but beautiful. Cream-colored cotton with tiny tucks at the bodice, long sleeves and a high collar. Nothing fancy, but clean and honest, like the marriage it represented. On Friday evening, a letter arrived from Boston. Beatrice recognized her father's handwriting. For a long moment, she considered burning it unread. Then curiosity won. The letter was short. "My dear Beatrice, your mother has forbidden me from writing, but I cannot stay silent. We received word from Mrs. Farnsworth about your engagement. Your mother says you're making another mistake. Your sisters say you're acting rashly. But I remember the look in your eyes when you left, that desperate determination to be something more than what we'd decided you should be. I hope you found it, daughter. I hope this man sees you the way I always have, as brave and strong and worth choosing. Your loving father." Beatrice read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Pearl found her sitting on the porch, letter clutched in her hand. "Bad news. Good news, I think." Beatrice wiped her eyes. "My father gave me his blessing." "That's wonderful." "It is. But it also means this is real. This is actually happening." Pearl sat beside her, solid and warm. "You scared?" "Terrified." "Good. That means it matters." Pearl patted her hand. "Love's supposed to be scary. The trick is being scared together." Saturday dawned clear and hot. Beatrice dressed in her new gown with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Pearl pinned her hair and added a ribbon Beatrice recognized as one of Pearl's own treasures. "Something borrowed," Pearl said gruffly. They walked to the courthouse together. Nate was already there wearing his best shirt and looking like he might bolt at any second. With him was Tom Walsh, a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through town. Mrs. Henderson arrived carrying wildflowers she'd picked that morning. Mrs. Alvarez came with her husband. Even the young woman Beatrice had made the dress for appeared, children in tow, clutching a small gift wrapped in newspaper. It wasn't a big crowd, but it was people who'd shown up, people who cared. The ceremony was brief. Tom Walsh kept it simple, asking them to speak their own promises. Nate went first, his voice steady despite his white-knuckled grip on her hands. "Beatrice, I promise to see you, every day, as you are not as anyone thinks you should be. I promise to work beside you, not above you. I promise to talk when it's hard, and listen when it's harder. I promise to honor your strength and hold your fears. I can't promise forever, life taught me that lesson hard, but I promise every day I've got." Beatrice's voice shook as she answered, "Nate, I promise to stand with you in your grief and celebrate with you in your joy. I promise to build something true with you, even when we don't know what we're building. I promise to be honest, even when honesty hurts. I promise to choose you every morning for as long as we both have mornings to choose." Tom Walsh smiled. "Then, by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Nate pulled her close and kissed her like she was something precious, like she was chosen. The small crowd applauded. Mrs. Alvarez cried openly. Pearl dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, and Beatrice thought, this is what home feels like. Afterward, they gathered at Pearl's for cake and coffee. It was modest but joyful. People told stories and laughed. The young woman pressed her gift into Beatrice's hands, a small wooden cross carved by her son. "For your new home," she whispered, "wherever that is." As the sun set, Nate and Beatrice walked back to his small rented room above the smithy. It wasn't much a bed, a table, a stove, but it was theirs now. "We need to find a real place," Nate said. "Somewhere we can build something. I saw land for rent, north of town near the river." "Is it good land?" "No." Beatrice smiled. "But it's ours if we want it." Nate pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I'm scared I'll fail you. I'm scared I'll be too much for you." "Then we'll be scared together." They stood there in the fading light, two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage, daring to believe that broken things could still build something beautiful. Outside Dodge City carried on raucous and rough and full of second chances. And inside that small room, Nathaniel and Beatrice Morrison began the hard work of building a life worth living. The land they rented was every bit as unforgiving as Beatrice had warned. 20 acres of stubborn Kansas earth that seemed determined to grow nothing but scrub grass and disappointment. The creek that supposedly ran through the property was barely a trickle by late August, and the barn that came with the lease had more holes than walls. But it was theirs. Nate stood in the middle of it that first morning, hands on his hips, surveying the work ahead. Beatrice watched him from the wagon, trying to see what he saw: potential or disaster. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Can we make this work?" He turned to her, and she saw the doubt flicker across his face before he pushed it down. "We can try. That's all anyone can do." They moved their meager possessions into the barn. 2 bedrolls, a trunk of clothes, Nate's tools, Beatrice's sewing supplies. That first night, they slept on straw under a roof that leaked starlight, and Beatrice thought about how far she'd fallen from the life her mother had imagined for her. Then Nate's arm tightened around her waist, pulling her close, and she thought maybe falling wasn't always a bad thing. The work started before dawn. Nate began repairing the barn, while Beatrice hauled water from the creek in buckets, trying to coax life from the garden plot she'd marked out. Her hands blistered. Her back ached. The sun beat down relentless and cruel. But she kept working. Mrs. Henderson had been generous about Beatrice's hours, allowing her to work 3 days a week at the shop, while spending the other days on the homestead. It wasn't enough money, but it was something. Every coin went into a jar they kept hidden in the barn savings for seed for tools for the 100 small necessities that kept adding up. 2 weeks into their marriage, Beatrice was in town picking up supplies when she ran into Ruth Henderson. Not Mrs. Henderson from the dress shop. This was Ruth from the general store, the tired woman with 4 children who Beatrice had seen around town but never spoken to directly. Ruth was arguing with the store clerk, her voice tight with desperation. "Please, I'll pay you next week. My husband gets paid on Friday." "Ma'am, I can't keep extending credit. You already owe $12. "I know, but the children need to eat." Beatrice stepped forward without thinking. "I'll cover it." Both Ruth and the clerk turned to stare. "You don't have to," Ruth began. "I know I don't have to." Beatrice pulled coins from her purse and set them on the counter. "But I'm going to." After the clerk had wrapped Ruth's purchases, the 2 women stood outside in the brutal afternoon heat. Ruth's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you. I'll pay you back." "Don't worry about it." "No, I will. I promise." Ruth shifted the heavy package in her arms. "I heard you got married to Nate Morrison." "I did." Silas was furious when he found out. Beatrice's stomach tightened. "I don't care what Silas thinks." "You should." Ruth glanced around as if checking who might overhear. "My husband works for him sometimes, at the ranch. He says Silas has been, well, he's been drinking more. Talking about how you humiliated him. How you and Nate both need to be taught a lesson. He's just bitter." "Maybe. But bitter men do stupid things." Ruth touched Beatrice's arm. "Just be careful, please." That evening, Beatrice told Nate about the conversation. They were sitting outside the barn eating the simple supper she'd prepared: beans and cornbread. Nothing fancy, but filling. Nate's jaw tightened. "I'll talk to the sheriff." "And say what, that Silas is drinking and complaining? That's not a crime." "No, but threatening people is." "He hasn't actually threatened us." "Not yet." Nate set down his plate, appetite clearly gone. "I've seen men like Bridger before. They can't stand being shown up, especially by a woman. And when you stood up to him in front of the whole town, I should have kept my mouth shut." "No." He reached for her hand. "You were right to say what you said. I'm just worried about what he'll do next." Beatrice wanted to tell him he was being paranoid, but she'd seen the look in Silas's eyes that day on the street, cold and calculating and mean. "We'll be careful," she said finally. 3 days later, someone set fire to their water barrel. They woke to the smell of smoke and stumbled outside to find the barrel they'd spent 2 days filling engulfed in flames. By the time they'd doused it with dirt, the barrel was ruined and their entire water supply was gone. Nate stood staring at the charred remains, his hands clenched into fists. "This was deliberate." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." He kicked at the ashes. "And I know who did it." "Nate. I'm going to kill him." The words were said so calmly, they were more frightening than if he'd shouted. Beatrice grabbed his arm. "No, you're not. You're going to take a breath and think." "I'm done thinking. That bastard came onto our land and what if you go after him now? You'll end up in jail or dead. Is that what you want?" He yanked his arm away. "I want him to stop. I want to protect what's mine." "I'm not yours to protect like a piece of property." The words came out harsher than she'd intended. Nate flinched as if she'd struck him. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "I meant—" He ran both hands through his hair, frustration and fear warring in his expression. "I can't lose anyone else, Bea. I can't. And the thought of him hurting you, of me being too late again." His voice broke on the last word. Beatrice's anger drained away. She stepped close and wrapped her arms around him, feeling him shake with suppressed emotion. "I'm here. I'm safe. We're both safe. For now." "Then we deal with now. We go to the sheriff. We tell him what happened. We do this the right way." It took him a long moment, but finally he nodded against her shoulder. Sheriff Gordon was less helpful than they'd hoped. He listened to their story, made notes, promised to look into it. But his expression said he'd heard complaints about Silas Bridger before, and nothing had come of them. "I'll ride out to his place, have a talk with him. But unless you've got proof it was him, there's not much I can do. So we just wait for him to try something else." Nate's voice was tight with controlled anger. "I'm saying be vigilant. Lock your doors. Keep your weapon close. And if you see anyone suspicious on your land, you shoot first and ask questions later. That's your right." It wasn't reassuring. They bought a new barrel and filled it. Nate started sleeping lighter, jerking awake at every sound. Beatrice caught him standing guard, some nights rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. The tension was wearing on both of them. Then, 2 weeks after the fire, Detective Marcus Wade appeared at their homestead. He arrived on a gray horse wearing dusty traveling clothes and a badge that caught the sunlight. Beatrice was hanging laundry when she spotted him approaching. Her first instinct was fear. Lawmen usually brought bad news. But Wade raised his hand in greeting, his expression open and unthreatening. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Detective Marcus Wade with the Pinkerton Agency. I'm hoping you and your husband might have a few minutes to talk." Nate emerged from the barn, hammer in hand, instantly wary. But Wade's calm demeanor seemed to ease some of his suspicion. They sat in the shade of the barn and Wade explained his presence. "I've been investigating a counterfeiting operation working through Kansas and Nebraska. We've traced several bad bills back to this area, and one name keeps coming up: Silas Bridger." Beatrice felt her stomach drop. "Counterfeiting?" "Yes, ma'am. We believe he's been printing fake currency and using his ranch as a base of operations. The problem is we don't have enough proof to get a warrant. I was hoping you might be able to help with that." "Why would we be able to help?" Nate asked. Wade pulled out a worn photograph. "This is what the printing plates look like. Small, about the size of a deck of cards, usually kept in a locked case. If you've ever been to Bridger's ranch, if you've seen anything like this." "I've never been to his ranch," Beatrice said. "He abandoned me before I ever set foot on his property." "But you corresponded with him. Do you still have his letters?" She'd burned them the night before her wedding to Nate. But she said, "I might have one or two left." "Why?" "Because forgers often have distinctive handwriting, and if we can prove the letters match documents related to the counterfeiting operation, it helps build our case." Beatrice glanced at Nate, who nodded slightly. "I'll look," she said, "but I can't promise anything." Wade stood, extending his hand first to Nate, then to Beatrice. His grip was firm, respectful. "I appreciate your time, and Mrs. Morrison." He paused. "I heard what happened to your water barrel. You should know that Bridger's been getting more erratic lately, more desperate. If he's the one behind the counterfeiting ring and he thinks we're closing in, he might do something stupid." "That's comforting," Nate said dryly. "I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to warn you." Wade's expression was serious. "Watch your backs, both of you." After he left, Beatrice and Nate stood in tense silence. "We should help him," Beatrice said finally, "and make ourselves even bigger targets. We're already targets. At least this way, maybe Silas ends up in prison where he belongs." Nate wanted to argue, she could see it in the set of his shoulders, but he knew she was right. "Fine. But you're not going anywhere near Bridger or his ranch. Understood?" "I'm not helpless, Nate." "I know you're not. But I'm asking you as your husband, as someone who loves you, please don't take unnecessary risks." The please did it. Beatrice nodded. The next morning she remembered the coat. 3 weeks earlier, before she'd known about the counterfeiting, Silas had brought a coat to the dress shop for mending. Mrs. Henderson had been out, and Beatrice had accepted it, planning to do the work herself. But then everything with the wedding had happened, and the coat had been forgotten, still hanging in the shop's back room. She told Nate about it over breakfast. There might be something in the pockets. Papers, receipts, something Wade could use. "So we go get the coat and turn it over to Wade." "I'll go get the coat. You have work at the smithy." B. It's broad daylight. The shop is in the middle of town. What's he going to do, attack me in front of witnesses? Nate didn't like it, but he relented. Beatrice walked into town, the morning sun already promising another scorching day. Main Street was busy with the usual traffic wagons, horses, people going about their business. Normal, safe. She collected the coat from the shop, telling Mrs. Henderson she was taking it home to work on. Then she headed back toward the edge of town where their wagon was parked. She was halfway there when Silas stepped out from between two buildings. Her heart lurched into her throat. "Hello, Beatrice." He looked worse than the last time she'd seen him. Unshaven eyes, bloodshot clothes, wrinkled. But what frightened her most was his smile, too wide, too bright, wrong in every way. "Silas." She kept her voice steady, kept walking. "Excuse me." He matched her pace. "Heard you've been talking to the law. To that Pinkerton detective." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play stupid. It doesn't suit you." He grabbed her arm and she felt his fingers dig in hard enough to bruise. "What did you tell him?" "Let go of me." "Answer the question." People were starting to notice. A few stopped watching with the morbid curiosity of those who sensed drama brewing. Beatrice raised her voice. "I said let go of me." Silas's expression darkened, but he released her, clearly aware they had an audience. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You think you're so clever marrying that drifter, playing house on that worthless land, but you're still the same fat girl nobody wanted, and sooner or later Morrison's going to figure that out and walk away just like I did." Each word was calculated to wound. And they did, God, they did. But Beatrice had spent too many years absorbing her mother's cruelty to crumble under Silas's. She looked him straight in the eye. "The difference between you and Nate is that he's a man and you're a coward. He keeps his promises, he honors his commitments, and when he looks at me, he sees a partner, not a possession." She stepped closer, dropping her voice so only he could hear. "I know about the counterfeiting, Silas. I know you're desperate and scared, and I hope they catch you. I hope you spend the rest of your miserable life in prison thinking about how you destroyed yourself." His hand moved toward his hip, where she knew he kept a gun. But before he could draw, a voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Sheriff Gordon had appeared, hand resting casually on his own weapon. Silas's face went through several expressions: rage, calculation, forced calm. "No problem, Sheriff. Just catching up with an old friend. Didn't look friendly from where I was standing. We're done here." Silas tipped his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Mrs. Morrison?" He walked away. Beatrice's knees went weak with relief. Sheriff Gordon stepped close. "You all right, ma'am?" "I'm fine." "That man's dangerous. You should stay away from him." "I'm trying to. He's the one who keeps finding me." The sheriff's expression was grim. "Detective Wade came to see me this morning, told me about his investigation. I want you to know I'm taking this seriously now. I've got deputies watching Bridger's ranch. If he makes a move, we'll know about it." It should have been reassuring, but Beatrice had the sick feeling they were running out of time. She took the coat straight to Detective Wade at the boarding house where he was staying. He searched the pockets methodically, finding nothing at first. Then he checked the lining. Well, well. He pulled out a small envelope, carefully hidden in a torn seam. Inside were handwritten notes, names, dates, amounts, and a list of what looked like drop-off locations. "This is it," Wade said, satisfaction in his voice. "This is what we needed. So you can arrest him. I can get a warrant. We'll raid his ranch tomorrow at dawn. With this evidence and what we find there, he'll go away for a long time." Beatrice should have felt victorious. Instead, she just felt tired. "Will we have to testify?" "Probably, but that's months away. For now, just go home, lock your doors, stay close to your husband. This'll all be over soon." She rode home as fast as the wagon would carry her. found Nate working on the barn roof, shirtless and sweating in the afternoon heat. "It's happening," she called up. "Wade's raiding Bridger's ranch tomorrow." Nate climbed down, wiping his face with a rag. So we wait. That night, neither of them slept much. They lay tangled together, listening to every sound jumping at shadows. Beatrice pressed her face against Nate's chest and tried to breathe steadily. "After tomorrow it'll be different," she whispered. "I hope so. We can focus on building, on making this place a real home." His arms tightened around her. "I want that. God, I want that so much." "Then that's what we'll have." But the words felt like tempting fate. Dawn came quiet and tense. Nate insisted on riding into town to see how the raid had gone. Beatrice wanted to argue, but knew he'd go anyway. So she sent him off with a kiss and a knot of worry in her stomach. Then she set about her morning chores, trying to keep busy, trying not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. She was hauling water from the creek when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Beatrice straightened, shading her eyes against the rising sun. 3 riders topped the ridge, heading straight for the homestead. Her blood turned to ice. Silas Bridger was in the lead, flanked by 2 men she didn't recognize. Their faces were hard, their intentions clear. She dropped the bucket and ran for the barn for the rifle Nate kept loaded by the door. Her hands shook as she grabbed it, checked the chamber, positioned herself in the doorway. The riders pulled up 20 feet away. Silas looked worse than yesterday, wild-eyed, desperate, dangerous. He'd clearly been drinking. The other 2 men looked like hired thugs, the kind who'd do anything for money. "Where's your husband?" Silas called out. "Not here." "Good. Makes this easier." He dismounted and his men followed. "See, I had a visit from the law this morning. Very early, very unexpected. And I got to thinking about how they knew where to look, about who might have given them information." "I don't know what you're talking about." "You're a terrible liar, Beatrice." He took a step forward. She raised the rifle. "Don't come any closer." He stopped, but his smile was cruel. "You going to shoot me in cold blood? I don't think so. You're too proper, too civilized." "Try me." For a moment they faced off. Then Silas laughed. "You cost me everything. My reputation, my business, my freedom. Wade seized my property this morning, arrested 2 of my men, found the plates, the press, everything." His voice rose. "I've got nothing left. And if I'm going down, I'm taking you with me." He lunged forward. Beatrice pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. The shot went wide. She'd never fired a gun before, didn't know how to compensate for the recoil. But it was close enough that Silas stumbled back, shock replacing his rage. "You crazy!" She worked the lever, chambering another round. Her hands were steadier now, fueled by adrenaline and pure survival instinct. "The next one won't miss. Get off my land." One of Silas's men reached for his gun, but before he could draw, another shot rang out, not from Beatrice's rifle. Sheriff Gordon and 2 deputies appeared from behind the barn, weapons drawn. "Nobody move!" Silas spun, face contorting with fury and defeat. For a moment, Beatrice thought he might actually draw on the sheriff, might choose death over capture. But then his shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him all at once, leaving just a broken, desperate man who'd gambled everything and lost. "It's over, Bridger," Gordon said. "Hands up, all 3 of you." As the deputies moved in to make arrests, Silas looked at Beatrice one last time. "I could have loved you," he said quietly, "if you'd been different." Beatrice lowered the rifle, her arms shaking from more than just the weapon's weight. "No, you couldn't. Because love isn't about what someone looks like. It's about seeing who they are and choosing them anyway. You never learned that." They took him away. Gordon stayed behind, checking that Beatrice was all right. "Wade figured Bridger might try something stupid. Had us watching the place since before dawn." He looked at her with new respect. "You handled yourself well, ma'am." "I was terrified." "Brave people usually are. That's what makes it brave. Nate arrived 10 minutes later, riding hard Wade beside him. He'd been in town when word came about the confrontation. He leaped off his horse before it fully stopped and pulled Beatrice into his arms so hard she couldn't breathe. "I'm all right," she managed. "I'm all right." He held her at arm's length, checking for injuries, then crushed her against his chest again. "I should have been here. You couldn't have known. I should have been here." She pulled back enough to look at his face, saw the fear and guilt and love all tangled together. "But I was here, and I protected what's ours. Because that's what partners do." It took him a moment, but finally he nodded, pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm sorry. For doubting you. For trying to protect you like you needed protecting. You can protect me. Just remember, I can protect us too. Deal." Wade approached hat in hand. "Mrs. Morrison will need a statement from you, but that can wait until you've had time to settle. And I want you to know what you did providing that evidence that took real courage. I just want it to be over. It is. Bridger's going away for a long time, and his associates are already talking, trying to cut deals. You and your husband are safe now." After everyone left, Nate and Beatrice stood in the middle of their struggling homestead, holding each other as the sun climbed higher. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered into her hair. "You didn't. You won't. You can't promise that." "No. But I can promise I'll fight like hell to stay." He laughed, shaky and relieved. "God, I love you." "I love you too." They stood there a long time, neither wanting to let go, both acutely aware of how close they'd come to losing everything. Finally, Beatrice stepped back, wiping her eyes. "We should get back to work. That barn roof isn't going to fix itself." Nate stared at her. "Your husband nearly lost you to a violent criminal, and you want to fix the barn roof. What else should we do? Sit around being scared?" She picked up the water bucket she'd dropped earlier. "We've got a life to build. Might as well get started." He shook his head in wonder. Then he kissed her, deep and grateful and full of promise. "All right then, let's build." The days after Silas's arrest should have brought peace, but Beatrice found herself jumping at shadows. Every creak of the barn made her reach for the rifle. Every horse on the road made her heart race. Nate noticed, though he didn't say anything at first. He just stayed closer, worked where she could see him, touched her more often. Small reassurances that they were both still breathing. A week after the confrontation, Beatrice woke in the middle of the night screaming. Nate had her in his arms before she was fully conscious, murmuring low and steady, "You're safe. I've got you. You're safe." She pressed her face against his chest, shaking so hard her teeth chattered despite the summer heat. "I keep seeing him. Keep hearing that gunshot. What if I'd actually killed him?" "You didn't." "But I could have. I wanted to." Her voice broke. "For a second I wanted him dead, and that terrifies me." Nate pulled back enough to look at her face in the moonlight streaming through the gaps in the barn walls. "You were protecting yourself. Protecting what's ours. There's no shame in that." "It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like I'm falling apart." "Then fall apart. I'll catch you." He tucked her head back under his chin. "After Margaret died, I had nightmares for months. I'd wake up thinking I could still save her, still change what happened. And then reality would crash back, and I'd have to live through losing her all over again." "How did you make it stop?" "I didn't. It just got quieter over time. More manageable." His hand stroked her hair. "But I was alone then." "You're not alone." She clung to him until her breathing steadied and sleep pulled her back under. The nightmares continued, but having Nate there made them bearable. Work became their salvation. There was always something that needed doing, fixing, building, planting, hauling. The land demanded everything they had, and then asked for more. But slowly, grudgingly, it began to yield. The garden Beatrice had planted started producing. Not much, but enough. tomatoes and squash and beans that they ate fresh or preserved for winter. Nate built a chicken coop, and they bought 6 hens that laid eggs with surprising regularity. Pearl gave them a goat that produced milk, and Beatrice learned to make cheese from a recipe Mrs. Alvarez shared. It wasn't prosperity, but it was survival that tasted like hope. Ruth Henderson started visiting once a week, bringing her children. The oldest, a boy named Daniel, was fascinated by Nate's blacksmithing work. He'd watch for hours as Nate shaped metal, asking endless questions that Nate answered with surprising patience. One afternoon, while the children played and the women worked on mending, Ruth said quietly, "I left him." Beatrice's hands stilled on the shirt she was repairing. "Your husband?" "Last week. Took the children and moved in with my sister." Ruth's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "He came home drunk again. Started hitting Daniel because he'd forgotten to close the chicken coop. And I couldn't anymore. I couldn't let my children grow up thinking that's what love looks like." "Good for you." "Is it? I've got no money, no prospects. My sister's husband isn't happy about feeding 4 extra mouths. I might have made everything worse." Beatrice set down her mending and took Ruth's hand. "You showed your children that there's a difference between staying and surviving. That's worth everything." Ruth's eyes filled. "You make it sound noble. I feel like a failure." "You're the opposite of a failure. You're what brave looks like." Beatrice squeezed her hand. "And if you need work, Mrs. Henderson's been asking if I know anyone who can help at the shop. It doesn't pay much, but it's something." "You do that for me." "We do it for each other. That's how we survive out here." Ruth got the job. Within a month, she'd saved enough to rent a small house. Her children started looking less haunted, more like children should look. And Ruth herself began to smile, tentative at first, then more freely. Watching her transform reminded Beatrice of her own journey. How far she'd come from that woman sitting on a trunk at the train station, drowning in humiliation. September brought cooler weather and news that made Beatrice's stomach drop. Detective Wade appeared at their homestead one afternoon, his expression grim. "I wanted you to hear this from me. Silas Bridger escaped custody 3 days ago." The words hung in the air like a threat. Nate's face went hard. "How?" "He had help. One of the deputies turned out to be on his payroll. They overpowered the other guard and just walked out." Wade's jaw was tight with anger. "We've got men looking for him, but he knows this territory. Could be anywhere." Beatrice felt her carefully constructed sense of safety crumble. "You think he'll come here? I think he's desperate and angry and has nothing left to lose, which makes him dangerous." Wade looked between them. "I can post a deputy here if you want. Or you could come into town, stay at Pearl's until we find him." "We're not leaving." Nate's voice was flat. "This is our home." "Nate," Beatrice started. "No, we worked too hard for this. I'm not running." Wade nodded slowly. "Then keep your weapons close. Don't go anywhere alone. And if you see anything suspicious, fire 3 shots in the air. I'll have men close enough to hear." After he left, Beatrice and Nate stood in tense silence. "We should go to town," Beatrice said finally. "You want to leave?" "I want us to live. Pride's not worth dying for." Nate turned to her, and she saw the war in his eyes, fear fighting with stubborn determination. "I already ran once. After Margaret and Sarah died, I ran for 5 years. Different towns, different jobs, never staying, never putting down roots. I'm done running B. If Bridger wants to come for us, let him come. But I'm standing my ground." "Then we stand together." He pulled her close, and she felt him trembling, or maybe that was her. "I'm scared," he admitted against her hair. "Me too." They spent the next 3 days in careful vigilance. Nate worked close to the barn, always within earshot. Beatrice kept the rifle loaded and nearby. They took turns keeping watch at night, sleeping in shifts. The exhaustion was brutal. But worse was the waiting, the not knowing when or if Silas would appear. On the 4th night, Nate was on watch when he heard horses approaching. He woke Beatrice with a hand over her mouth, silencing her before she could make a sound. They moved to positions they'd planned, Nate by the door, with the rifle, Beatrice in the loft, with the pistol Wade had lent them. The horses stopped outside. Beatrice's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Then a familiar voice called out, "Morrison, it's Marcus Wade. I've got news." Nate lowered the rifle, relief and disappointment mixing on his face. He opened the door. Wade stood there with 2 deputies, all of them looking exhausted and travel-worn. "We got him. Bridger's back in custody." Beatrice climbed down from the loft legs, shaking. "Where?" "He tried to cross into Colorado. A rancher recognized him from the wanted posters and alerted the local sheriff. There was a shootout." Wade paused. "He didn't make it." The words took a moment to register. "He's dead?" Nate asked. "Yes. Chose to fight rather than surrender. It's over now. Really over." Beatrice should have felt something: relief, vindication, maybe even pity. Instead, she just felt hollow. "Thank you for telling us." Wade tipped his hat. "You folks can get back to your lives now. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry you got caught up in this." After they left, Beatrice and Nate stood in the barn doorway, watching the eastern sky start to lighten. "How do you feel?" Nate asked. "Tired, empty, I don't know." She leaned against him. "Is it wrong that I'm not sorry he's dead?" "No. He made his choices. He could have surrendered, could have faced justice. He chose violence instead. I keep thinking about what he said, that last day, that he could have loved me if I'd been different." She laughed bitterly. "Part of me still wants to believe that if I'd just been thinner, prettier, more—" "Stop." Nate turned her to face him. "He couldn't have loved you because he didn't know how to love anyone. That's not about you. That's about him being broken in ways that had nothing to do with your body or your worth. How can you be so sure? Because I love you, as you are, not despite anything, not in spite of anything, just because you're you." He cupped her face in his calloused hands. "You're brilliant and brave and beautiful, and anyone who can't see that is blind." She kissed him, then, desperate and grateful, and still a little broken, but healing. The next few weeks brought a kind of peace they hadn't experienced before. Without the constant threat hanging over them, they could actually focus on building rather than just surviving. Nate taught Beatrice to shoot properly, not just panic firing, but controlled, aimed shots. She taught him to read better, working through the old newspapers Pearl saved for them. They learned each other's rhythms, figured out how to work together without stepping on each other's toes. And slowly, the homestead began to look less like a disaster and more like a home. One October afternoon, Pearl arrived with a wagon full of supplies and a gleam in her eye. "What's all this?" Beatrice asked. "Call it an investment." Pearl started unloading lumber and nails and tools. "That barn's falling down around your ears. Time to build you a proper house." "Pearl, we can't afford." "I'm not asking you to pay, not yet anyway." She waved off Beatrice's protests. "You two have been through hell. You deserve a real home. Besides, Nate's going to do the labor and you're going to sew me 6 new dresses. We'll call it even." Beatrice's throat tightened. "Why are you doing this?" Pearl's expression softened. "Because 30 years ago someone did it for me. And because watching you two fight for each other reminds me that good things are still possible in this world." They built the house through autumn, working every spare hour. It was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it had real walls, and a roof that didn't leak, and windows with glass that Pearl had somehow procured. Ruth helped. Mrs. Henderson helped. Mrs. Alvarez brought food and stayed to hammer nails. Even some of the men from town showed up, drawn by Nate's reputation as a skilled blacksmith and the story of what he and Beatrice had survived. Tom Walsh, the circuit preacher, came to bless the house when it was finished. "Lord, we ask your blessing on this home and the people who'll live in it. May it be a place of love and laughter, of hard work and honest rest. May it stand strong against whatever storms come. And may the people within its walls remember that home isn't just a place, it's a choice to keep choosing each other every day. Beatrice stood holding Nate's hand, tears streaming down her face, thinking about how far they'd both come. That night they slept in their own house for the first time. A real bed instead of bedrolls, a roof that didn't leak starlight, walls that blocked the wind. "We did it," Beatrice whispered in the darkness. "We did. I'm so tired." "Me too." But it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came from building something that mattered. November brought the first hard frost and a letter from Boston. Beatrice recognized her father's handwriting. She sat on the porch of their new house, the letter unopened in her lap, working up the courage to read it. Nate came out and sat beside her. "Bad news." "Don't know yet. Haven't opened it." "Want me to read it first?" She considered, then shook her head. "No. Whatever it says, I need to face it." She broke the seal and unfolded the paper. Her father's neat script filled the page. "My dearest Beatrice, I am writing with news that I know will pain you. Your mother passed away 3 weeks ago. It was her heart, sudden and peaceful. She did not suffer. Your sisters are distraught, and I find myself at a loss. In going through her things, I found letters, dozens of them. Letters you'd written over the years that she never gave me. Letters about your life in Kansas, your marriage, your struggles and triumphs. I read them all, and I wept. Wept for the daughter I lost, because I was too weak to stand up to your mother's cruelty. Wept for the years we missed. Wept for the fact that you built a life I know nothing about. But mostly, I wept with pride. Pride that you had the courage to leave. Pride that you found love and partnership. Pride that you survived when so many would have given up. I do not ask for forgiveness, Beatrice. I do not deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I see you now. I always did, really. I just lacked the courage to say so. Your loving father." Beatrice read the letter twice, then handed it to Nate. He read in silence, then pulled her close. "I'm sorry. I'm not sure what I feel." She stared at the horizon. "I thought I'd feel relieved, or vindicated. But mostly I just feel sad. Sad that she died without ever understanding that I was always enough. Sad that my father spent so many years silent. Sad for all the wasted time." "Do you want to go back, for the funeral?" She thought about it. Thought about Boston, and her sisters, and the life she'd left behind. Then she looked at their small house, at the land they'd worked so hard to tame, at the man who'd chosen her every day. "No, this is my home now. This is where I belong." Nate kissed her temple. "Then that's where we'll stay." She wrote her father back that evening. A short letter explaining that she couldn't return, but that she forgave him. That she understood how hard it was to stand up to someone you loved, even when they were wrong. That she hoped he'd find peace, and then she sealed it and let it go. December arrived with snow, and the realization that Beatrice's monthly courses were late. At first, she told herself it was stress. The trauma of everything they'd been through could disrupt a woman's cycle. But when a second month passed and nausea began waking her in the mornings, she couldn't deny it anymore. She was pregnant. The knowledge terrified her. She'd seen what pregnancy had done to Nate's first wife, seen how it had killed both Margaret and their daughter. And now the same thing was happening inside her own body. She kept it secret for 2 weeks, trying to figure out how to tell him, trying to decide if she even wanted to continue the pregnancy or if there were ways to know. She couldn't think like that. Finally, on a clear winter evening, she told him. They were sitting by the fire, Nate mending a harness, and Beatrice pretending to sew. Her hands had been shaking all day. "I need to tell you something." He looked up, concern immediately crossing his face. "What's wrong?" "I'm pregnant." The words fell into the space between them like stones into deep water. Nate's face went through several expressions: shock, fear, something that might have been joy, then fear again. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He set down the harness, stood, sat back down, stood again, ran both hands through his hair. "Nate, say something. I'm terrified. Me too. He crossed to her and knelt, taking her hands in his. They were shaking as badly as hers. Margaret died. Sarah died. I can't. His voice broke. I can't lose you. I won't survive it. You don't know that will happen. I don't know it won't. He pressed his forehead against their joined hands. I'm sorry. I know I should be happy. I know this is supposed to be a blessing, but all I can think about is blood and death and holding you while you... Stop! She pulled her hands free and cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. I'm not Margaret. This isn't the same situation. We're near town. There's a doctor. We have help. But I'm scared too. Terrified, actually. But I'm also... She stopped, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. I'm also happy. Because this is our child. Yours and mine. And maybe she'll have your eyes and my stubbornness. Or maybe he'll have your steadiness and my sharp tongue. Either way, we made this. Together. Tears were streaming down Nate's face now. What if I can't protect you? Then we'll face it together. Like we've faced everything else. He pulled her into his arms, holding on like she might disappear. I love you, he said against her hair. God, I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too. And I need you to try to be happy about this. Because I can't carry both the pregnancy and your fear. It took him a moment, but finally he nodded, pulled back, placed both hands on her still flat stomach. Hello in there, he said softly. I'm your father, and I'm absolutely terrified of you, but I promise I'm going to try my best. Beatrice laughed through her tears. That's the most honest thing you've ever said. They told Pearl first, who immediately went into planning mode, finding a midwife, making lists of supplies they'd need, lecturing them both about nutrition and rest. Ruth cried with happiness and started sewing baby clothes. Mrs. Henderson gave Beatrice stern instructions about not overworking herself, then immediately assigned her lighter tasks at the shop. The whole small community they'd built seemed to rally around them. But as winter deepened and Beatrice's body began to change, Nate's fear grew worse instead of better. He started having nightmares again, not just about Margaret and Sarah now, but about Beatrice dying in childbirth, about holding another small corpse, about being left alone with unbearable grief. He'd wake gasping, reaching for her, needing to feel her breathing beside him. I'm here, she'd murmur. I'm all right. But the fear was eating him alive. Finally, one night in January, Beatrice had had enough. This has to stop. Nate was standing at the window, staring out at the snow-covered land, tension radiating from every line of his body. I can't help it. Yes, you can. You're choosing fear over faith. You're choosing to live in a tragedy that hasn't happened, instead of the present moment, where I'm alive and healthy and carrying our child. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. She stood, moved to face him. You think you're the only one who's scared? You think I don't wake up every morning wondering if this is the day something goes wrong. But I choose to hope anyway. I choose to believe we can be different. And I need you to choose that too. I'm trying. Try harder. Her voice was sharp, cutting. Because I can't do this without you. Not the pregnancy, not the birth, not raising this child. I need you present, not drowning in ghosts. He flinched as if she'd struck him. That's not fair. Life's not fair. Margaret's death wasn't fair. Sarah's death wasn't fair. Silas abandoning me wasn't fair. But we survived anyway. We built this anyway. She placed his hand on her swelling belly. And we're going to survive this too. But only if we do it together. Something in him seemed to crack. He sank to his knees, pressing his face against her stomach, and sobbed. She held him, running her fingers through his hair, letting him purge the fear and grief and guilt he'd been carrying for so long. When he finally calmed, he looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. I'm sorry. I've been so focused on what I might lose that I forgot to celebrate what I have. Don't apologize. Just do better. He stood, pulled her close, and kissed her softly. "I'll try. I promise I'll try." And he did. Slowly, grudgingly, he let hope back in. Started talking to her belly at night, telling the baby stories about Margaret and Sarah, not as ghosts to fear, but as people who'd been loved. "Your sister Sarah liked butterflies," he'd say. "Used to chase them around the yard. Maybe you'll like them too." Or, "Your other mother loved music. Couldn't carry a tune to save her life, but she'd sing anyway, loud and off-key and happy." Beatrice would lie there listening, tears streaming down her face, grateful that he was finally able to hold both his past and his future at the same time. Spring came early that year, and with it a sense that they'd survived the hardest part. They'd made it through winter, through fear, through grief, and they were still standing. The baby came on a Tuesday in late April, 3 weeks earlier than Pearl had calculated. Beatrice woke before dawn with a pain that started low in her back and wrapped around her belly like an iron band. She lay still for a moment, breathing through it, hoping it was nothing. Then her water broke. "Nate." Her voice came out steady, despite the fear clawing at her throat. "It's time." He was awake instantly on his feet before she'd finished speaking. In the dim light, she could see panic flash across his face before he forced it down. "I'll get Pearl and the midwife. Don't leave me." "I have to." "Not yet." Another contraction hit harder this time. She gripped his hand, squeezing until she felt bones grind. "Just stay until it passes." He stayed, held her, breathed with her. When the pain eased, he helped her change into a clean nightgown and settled her in the bed they'd prepared for this moment. "I'm going now. I'll be fast." She nodded, already feeling the next contraction building. He rode like hell was chasing him. Made it to Pearl's in record time, pounded on the door hard enough to wake half the street. Pearl appeared with her hair still in rags, took one look at his face, and started issuing orders. "Go get Sarah Mitchell. She's the best midwife in 3 counties. Lives in the yellow house on Oak Street. Then ride to Ruth's and tell her to bring clean linens and that jar of herbs I gave her last month. Move." Nate moved. By the time he returned with Sarah Mitchell, a capable-looking woman in her 50s with gentle hands and sharp eyes, Beatrice was deep in labor. Pearl had arrived first and was already boiling water, laying out supplies, transforming their small house into something that felt organized and safe. Sarah examined Beatrice quickly, efficiently. "First baby." "Yes." Beatrice's voice was tight with pain. "You're doing fine. Strong contractions, good progress. This one's in a hurry." She looked at Nate, who was hovering near the bed like he didn't know what to do with his hands. "You planning to stay?" "Is that allowed?" "It's your wife, your baby. But I'll warn you now, birth isn't pretty. If you're going to faint, do it outside where you won't get in my way." "I'm not leaving." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Then make yourself useful. Sit behind her, let her lean on you. She's going to need something to push against." The hours that followed were the longest of Nate's life. He held Beatrice as she labored, feeling every contraction shake through her body, watching sweat pour down her face, hearing her cry out in pain that he couldn't fix or stop or take from her. "I can't," she gasped at one point. "It's too much. I can't." "Yes, you can." He pressed his forehead against her temple. "You're the strongest person I know. You faced down Bridger with a rifle. You built a home from nothing. You can do this." "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing's going wrong. Sarah says you're doing perfectly." "But Margaret." "You're not Margaret." He turned her face to his, made her look at him. "You're Beatrice Morrison. You're alive. You're here. And you're about to meet our baby." She nodded, gathering strength from somewhere deep inside, and bore down as the next contraction hit. Ruth arrived with supplies. Mrs. Alvarez appeared with food nobody would eat. Even Mrs. Henderson came, standing quietly in the corner, her presence a silent support. The sun was high when Sarah finally said, "Next push, you're going to meet your baby. Give me everything you've got." Beatrice screamed a raw, primal sound that came from the depths of her being, and pushed with every ounce of strength left in her body. And then there was crying. Not Beatrice's. A baby's. "It's a girl," Sarah announced, holding up a squalling red-faced infant covered in blood and vernix. "And she's got a set of lungs on her." Beatrice was laughing and crying at the same time. "Is she all right? All her fingers and toes?" 10 of each. Perfect. Sarah cleaned the baby quickly, efficiently, then laid her on Beatrice's chest. "Here's your daughter." Nate stared at the tiny creature in his wife's arms. She was so small, so fragile. Dark hair plastered to her skull, eyes squeezed shut against the brightness, fists waving in indignation at being forced into the cold world. She was alive. "Do you want to hold her?" Beatrice asked softly. He was terrified to touch her, terrified she'd break or disappear or stop breathing. But he reached out with shaking hands and took his daughter. She fit in his palms, weighed nothing, everything. "Hello, Sarah," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm your papa, and I'm so glad you're here." Beatrice's eyes widened. "Sarah, if that's all right, if you don't mind sharing the name with someone who came before." "I think it's perfect." She reached up and touched his face. "Both Sarahs. One who left too soon. One who's just beginning." The baby there, Sarah opened her eyes then. Dark blue and unfocused, but looking right at him. And something in Nate's chest that had been broken for 5 years suddenly started to mend. Pearl bustled over with warm blankets. "Let me take her while Sarah finishes with your wife. You look like you're about to keel over." "I'm fine." "You're pale as milk. Go outside. Get some air. Walk it off. That baby's not going anywhere." He handed Sarah to Pearl reluctantly and stumbled outside into the afternoon sun. The world looked different somehow, brighter, more real. He bent over, hands on his knees, and sobbed. Tom Walsh found him there 10 minutes later. The preacher had been passing by and heard about the birth from someone in town. "Congratulations." Nate straightened, wiping his face. "Thank you. I heard you named her Sarah. After my first daughter. And my first wife. Beatrice's idea." Tom was quiet for a moment. "That takes courage. To honor the past while embracing the future. I spent 5 years running from my past. Turns out the only way through is straight ahead." "And how do you feel now?" Nate thought about it. About Margaret and the first Sarah. About the grief he'd carried like stones in his pockets. About Beatrice and the new Sarah and the life they'd built from wreckage. "I feel grateful. Terrified, but mostly grateful." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "That's about as good as it gets in this world. Come on, let's go meet your daughter properly." Inside, Beatrice was cleaned up and propped against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. Sarah was nursing, making small snuffling sounds that made everyone in the room smile. Over the next few days, the whole community seemed to appear bearing gifts. Ruth brought a cradle her oldest son had built. Mrs. Henderson brought tiny gowns sewn from the softest cotton. Mrs. Alvarez brought food for a week. Even some of the men from town stopped by with offerings: a rocking chair, firewood, a small carved horse for when the baby was older. Pearl appointed herself as general manager, shooing people out when Beatrice needed rest, making sure Nate ate, keeping the house running, while the new parents figured out how to care for a newborn. "She's so small," Nate said one evening watching Sarah sleep in her cradle. "How is something this small even alive?" "Same way anything survives out here," Pearl said. "Stubbornness and love." The first weeks were hard in ways Nate hadn't anticipated. Sarah cried at all hours, demanding to be fed, changed, held, comforted. Neither he nor Beatrice slept more than an hour at a time. They stumbled through days in an exhausted haze, learning by trial and error. But there were moments of pure joy, like when Sarah would grip his finger with her tiny hand and hold on like she knew he was her father. Or when Beatrice would sing lullabies in a voice rough from lack of sleep, and the baby would settle against her chest with a contented sigh. One night, about a month after Sarah's birth, Nate woke to find Beatrice standing by the window holding the baby and crying silently. "What's wrong? Is she sick?" "No, she's fine. She's perfect." Beatrice turned, tears streaming down her face. "I'm just so happy I don't know what to do with it." "Is that stupid?" He crossed to her, wrapped his arms around both of them. "Not stupid. I feel it too. Like my chest is too small for everything I'm feeling. I keep waiting for something terrible to happen. For this to be taken away. Nothing's getting taken away. We're here. We're safe. We're together. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me we'll tell her, when she's old enough, about the first Sarah and Margaret. About Silas and the train station and everything we went through to get here. I don't want her to grow up thinking life is easy or that love just happens. I want her to know what we survived to build this family. I promise." Sarah made a small sound in her sleep, and they both looked down at her, at this tiny person who was somehow both of them and entirely herself. "She's going to be strong," Beatrice said. "She'll have to be growing up on this land. She'll be kind too, like her mother. And steady, like her father." They stood there in the quiet darkness, the three of them, a family forged from loss and courage and the stubborn refusal to give up. Summer arrived with its familiar heat and endless work, but this year felt different. The garden produced more than they could use. The chickens laid consistently. Nate's blacksmith business was steady enough that he'd built a proper forge near the house. Beatrice's sewing brought in reliable income, and she'd started teaching Ruth how to do the more complex alterations. They were making it. Actually, making it. One July afternoon, a stranger arrived at the homestead. He was well-dressed city clothes, riding a fine horse that spoke of money. Nate approached cautiously, hand near his weapon. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Mrs. Beatrice Morrison. I understand she's a skilled seamstress." Beatrice appeared at the door, Sarah on her hip. "I'm Beatrice Morrison." The man dismounted and removed his hat. "My name is Charles Waverly. I own a dry goods store in Kansas City. I've been hearing about your work, particularly about a dress you made for a Mrs. Ruth Henderson. She showed it to my wife, and my wife insisted I find you." "I see. I'd like to offer you a business arrangement. If you could produce a dozen dresses per month to my specifications, I'd pay premium prices and handle all the sales. You'd have guaranteed income and a much larger market for your work." Beatrice's mind raced. A dozen dresses a month. Premium prices. It was more opportunity than she'd ever imagined. But it would also mean long hours, probably hiring help, expanding in ways that felt overwhelming. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. I'm staying at the hotel in Dodge City for the next 3 days. Send word when you've decided." He handed her a card with his information. After he left, Beatrice and Nate sat on their porch, Sarah playing on a blanket between them. "That's a lot of money," Nate said carefully. "It is. But it would mean working more, being away from Sarah, turning what I love into something that feels like an obligation. So say no." "Can we afford to say no?" Nate was quiet for a long moment. "We're doing all right. Not rich, but we've got enough. The question isn't whether we can afford to say no. It's whether saying yes would make you happy." Beatrice looked at their small house, at the garden she'd coaxed from stubborn earth, at her husband and daughter, at the life they'd built from nothing. "I think I'm already happy." She sent word to Mr. Waverly that she appreciated the offer but wasn't interested. He seemed puzzled. Apparently people didn't turn down opportunities like that, but he left without argument. Ruth couldn't believe it. "Do you know what you just gave up?" "Yes, and I know what I kept." That fall they celebrated Sarah's 6-month birthday with a small party. Pearl baked a cake. Ruth brought her children. Mrs. Alvarez and her husband came. Tom Walsh said a blessing. Mrs. Henderson gave Sarah a tiny dress she'd been working on for weeks. As Beatrice looked around at the people gathered in their home, she felt overwhelmed by gratitude. These people who'd shown up for them over and over, who'd helped them survive and then helped them thrive. "I want to say something," she announced. Everyone quieted. "When I first came to Dodge City, I thought I was coming to meet my future husband. Turns out, I was coming to meet my family. Every one of you has given us something we needed: support, kindness, friendship, hope. We wouldn't have made it without you. So thank you. For seeing us when we couldn't see ourselves. For believing in us when we'd stopped believing. For being our family when we needed one most." Pearl was crying openly. Ruth dabbed at her eyes. Even Nate had to clear his throat several times. Tom Walsh raised his glass. "To family. Not the one we're born with, but the one we choose, and the one that chooses us." They all drank to that. Winter came again, but this year they were ready for it. The house was tight and warm. They had food stored, money saved, firewood stacked high. Sarah was thriving, fat and happy and curious about everything. One December evening, Nate and Beatrice sat by the fire while Sarah slept in her cradle. They'd been married a year and a half. It felt like a lifetime. It felt like yesterday. "Do you ever regret it?" Nate asked suddenly. "Coming west. Everything that happened." Beatrice thought about it. About Silas's cruelty. About the fear and the struggle and the times she'd been so tired she wanted to quit. "No. Because all of it led here. To this moment. To you and Sarah and this life." She reached for his hand. "Do you regret saving me that day at the train station?" "Saving you. You saved me. I was dead inside before I met you. You taught me how to live again." "We saved each other then." "Yeah. We did." Sarah made a small sound in her sleep. They both turned to look at her, this miracle they'd created, this proof that broken things could still make something beautiful. "I was thinking," Beatrice said, "about next spring. About maybe planting apple trees along the creek. It'll take years for them to bear fruit, but Sarah will be old enough to help pick apples by then." "You're thinking long-term now." "I'm thinking forever. I'm thinking about Sarah bringing her own children here someday. About building something that lasts beyond just us." Nate pulled her close. "I like that. Building something that lasts." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to coals, listening to their daughter breathe, feeling the weight and wonder of having survived everything to arrive at this moment. Outside, snow began to fall on the Kansas plains. But inside the Morrison homestead, all was warm and safe and home. Beatrice thought about the woman she'd been 18 months ago, sitting on a trunk at a train station, convinced her life was over. That woman had been devastated by rejection, certain she'd never be enough. She hadn't known that being enough was never the point. The point was finding someone who saw you're not enough and you're too much and chose you anyway. Not despite your flaws, but with them. As you were. Nate had chosen her. She'd chosen him. Together, they'd chosen this life, this home, this family. And that choice, made every single day, was worth more than any promise written in beautiful letters by a man who never learned what love actually meant. Years later, when Sarah was old enough to ask, Beatrice would tell her the whole story. About the train station and the abandonment and the stranger who became her father. About the fire and the threats and the courage it took to keep standing when everything said to fall. And Sarah would understand that love wasn't a fairy tale. It was work and choice and showing up even when things got hard. It was two broken people deciding to build something together. It was facing fear and choosing hope anyway. But for now, on this winter evening, Sarah slept peacefully while her parents held each other close and watched the snow fall. And in that small house on the Kansas prairie, three people who'd found each other against impossible odds proved that sometimes the best stories are the ones that almost never happened at all. They'd survived. They'd built something real. They'd become a family. And that was more than enough. It was everything.